So thanks to each of you for who are jumping on for this session. I think many of you recognize that out of the Office of the Vice President for Health Sciences at UB, we try and bring different opportunities out to our research administrators, our investigators, even the students that are engaged in the research process that we think could highlight tremendous resources or some opportunities. And in this particular instance, Scott Shurtleff is actually talking to us about something that his office has taken the lead on in the initiative that probably checks both boxes, where it could bring additional resources to you and also just provide lots of good opportunities as far as advancing programs. So I think that some of you probably know Scott. In fact, Kim Brunton is on the call as well, who is one of your primary contacts here at the university. But Scott is Vice President for Sponsored Program Services and Regulatory Affairs at SUNY RF. He oversees a lot there, has a lot of different projects on his plate, and one of them that he was just sort of alluding to is he's very much in a leadership position in some working groups that are hoping to coordinate and advance clinical trial even more so across the SUNY systems and across New York State. So I thank him for taking the time out to do this with all of that he has going on. Scott earned his JD at Syracuse. We won't hold that against him. We have a pretty good program at UV. I'm sorry, from Boston University.
Yeah.
You did your undergrad at Syracuse. And he was actually on campus at the university at one point. So for about 3 or 4 years, he was co-director of sponsored projects here at UB and made a significant impact there in helping that team build everything that they have in place. And he still works very closely with our teams right now. So when I first learned about all of the efforts that he and his team have put into coordinating and negotiating major agreements with some significant industry partners, we thought it would be good to highlight for everybody because what this has the opportunity to do, and he will explain it far better than I will, is make life easier for everybody that's part of the clinical trial process, and then also significantly shorten time to activation, which is something that we all strive towards. So thank you, Scott, for taking the time to do this. And I will be Vanna for you. You tell me when you want me to things along.
Vanna probably makes a lot more than either one of us.
Probably. Yeah.
Well, good afternoon, folks, and thank you, Jill, for that very generous introduction, and thank you all for taking time. So, the main focus of the discussion will be on a series of master agreements we've put in place over the past several years, but we'll also, as Jill alluded to, bring some updates on some ongoing efforts. So, if you can go to the next slide, please.
Just trying to. Okay, there we go.
Yep. So, over the past several years, and I see on this call Kim Brunton, we have two SUNY-wide working groups that really have been working on clinical trials and reducing barriers and increasing our opportunity to stand up trials quickly, both not only to grow research but also to bring new potentially beneficial trials to the patient population here in New York State. We have a clinical trials focus group, and at your campus, Kim Brunton and Pamela Anderson are on that group. And through that group, we have worked at enhancing training for clinical research administrators because we know there's a high turnover. We've been working on harmonizing fees, on, basically putting the infrastructure in place so that the four medical universities across SUNY can act as a single four-site entity and become a preferred partner for major pharma trials. I mean, if you think about the patient population at Buffalo, you've got multi-generational, you've got a different population in Syracuse, where upstate is, a very different population at downstate in Brooklyn, and then a different population again out at Stony Brook University. If we get our infrastructure in place and build the relationships and remove some barriers, there really isn't a trial we cannot fill with the patient population across SUNY's medical universities and hospital systems. So one of these components that we've worked on over the years is master clinical trial agreements. So Jill, if we can go to the next. Right, some of this I've kind of covered. Yep, I did. I kind of did all that. So great. So these are currently we have a number of master clinical trials in place. So what this means is if you or your PI, if you're not a PI, are approached with, they'll email you a protocol. Are you interested in this? If they're on this list, we have an agreement in place, which means that we're not going to get started negotiation and get bogged down and take 3 or 4 months, depending on what they have in there. These agreements are in place. So mechanically, how they work is typically, if if you're interested and you have the participants in your patient population, it's a negotiation of the budget, sign off by your IRB, um, and you're good to go. Start with recruiting. And I think if we go to the next slide, Jill, and we can just distribute those, Jill, so people know who they are. So really, these kind of come in as a purchase order, so that again, we're not negotiating everything. It's just appended and becomes an amendment to the master clinical trial agreement. This has worked quite well. I mean, there's a number of these pharmaceutical companies on the previous slide where we have a lot of activity across all four SUNY medical universities in the system, and so it's worked really well. We come in if it's a multi-site trial, meaning multi-site within SUNY, we'll work on joint budgets if possible, and we get them set up. It's been pretty good. The challenge right now, there's two big challenges that are starting to slow up the speed with which we're setting up clinical trials under these masters. One I've put on the slide for you. There's several new clinical research orgs. ICON you've probably heard of, or GOG. ICON is bought up, I think, virtually every other CRO in the world at this point in time. IQVIA is still out there. They're pretty good size. They they present to the pharmaceutical companies that the pharmaceutical companies can outsource all of their issues, and they'll handle all the regulatory, the data governance, and the trial negotiation, and all the post, you know, uh, QA, and. But what they don't tell the pharmaceutical companies is they haven't been honoring our master clinical trial agreements, so that we've had to renegotiate every individual agreement, and on several occasions where we already had a master in place. We're trying to work around that and are trying to get masters in place with ICON, and we have at least gotten a master NDA in place with ICON. And then if we go to the next slide, um, and these are where we have existing master non-disclosure agreements, right? So this is where, someone gets in touch with you or your PI, and there's a trial they think you might be interested in, but then you've got to negotiate a non-disclosure agreement. We have master non-disclosure agreements in place with these. So if you are contacted and it's one of these companies and they want you to sign an NDA, let them know we have an NDA in place. Shoot an email to me. I'll get it to you. And obviously work with and through Pamela and Kim on your campus. But we don't need to reinvent the wheel, and so that's the whole point of this, right? Is getting these stood up quickly. Um, Going back to some of the issues that I had raised in the earlier slide, the other big thing aside from these big international CROs is data privacy and the European GDPR standard. For those of you who aren't familiar with data privacy around the world, about the European Union brought in GDPR about 8 years ago, and it's not European HIPAA. It's way different than HIPAA. Any piece of data that is personally identifiable to you is considered personal data under GDPR, and there are protections. Your IP address, your age, your sex, anything, you know, anything that can identify you, is governed by these rules. And now 70% of the countries around the world have a similar regulatory environment. Um, by definition, data from study subjects here in the United States is not governed by GDPR, but oftentimes if the pharmaceutical company is headquartered in Europe, they will be pushing out GDPR data standards where we are agreeing via contract that we are a data controller meeting all of GDPR requirements by virtue of signing the contract. Our universities and hospital systems are not set up to meet that data standard. And quite frankly, from what I've read in terms of enforcement actions in Europe, A lot of their hospitals are not as well. But what we are doing is we've done a pilot at one of the medical universities about how we would go about running a compliant trial. And at another one of the medical universities, we've now engaged a specialized consultant to do a gap analysis to see how in our environment, where oftentimes we've got a hospital attached to a medical school, um, we can run these compliantly. And of course, at Buffalo, we're going to have a different challenge too because you don't own your your hospitals. So, um, Jill, why don't we go off the slide deck? Um, and I'll open it up to questions. I know I went through that fairly quickly, but I mean, again, if you see that name a name on the Master Clinical Trial Agreement, we've got an agreement in place. If you see the NDA, we've got an NDA in place, so don't reinvent the wheel. Reach out immediately to Kim or Pamela, and otherwise, what we are also trying to do, Jill is very active in a number of projects that we're working on with the chancellor and with the governor to look for some funding to help build some more infrastructure, again, with the goal of increasing clinical trials, making it easier, reducing the barriers, and also making it easier and more equitable for participation in research and participation, equity, and health outcomes. Um, so I'll stop rabbiting on and ask for questions.
Got it, Skim. Excuse me. Um, yeah, you knew I was going to talk. The the problem with the CROs not um, honoring, I guess,
Hmm.
the master trial agreements that have been. Is there a way around that? Is there any recourse that we have with, putting phrases in, those masters that, in the event that we have engaged a CRO, ours will take precedence. Like, because I know that the CROs will come out that, it's actually a contract with them
Hmm.
versus Pfizer or
Right.
Lilly or whatever. But in the presence of something that we have already negotiated with Lilly, is there recourse for us to put something in somewhere that says this trumps anything
Yeah.
that
We it's a good question, Joe. And we've done that. We were successful on a couple occasions and basically, if the CRO presented us with what I would call a vanilla CTA, like not lovely, not terrible, like maybe their subject injury was so-so and whatever. We have put in clauses where if there's a differentiation between the contract we directly have with the CRO and our master with the prime sponsor, that the prime sponsor trumps. We've gotten that twice, but which is better than zero, but not great. The other thing I've done is we've I've a couple times been able to find people further up the food chain in Icon and gotten Icon's counsel to intervene because they're actually trained. I mean, the real problem with Icon, and I don't mean to pick on them, is that they hire these quote unquote contract specialists, and I always look them up on LinkedIn, and this contract specialist, a week ago was selling Toyotas, and this other one is a mixed media painter, and they have a playbook, and they're trained to just say no and make you give three justifications for every change. And then this goes on for 2 months, and then finally they escalate it to the legal department. And it's really it's a waste. When we were standing up trials in 3 or 4 weeks, it's really can we agree on the budget? Can we sign off on the IRB? And boom, we go. So I've alerted Ram, the RF president. He's also the senior vice chancellor for SUNY. He has a lot of experience with clinical trials from his days at UVA. I want to actually somehow get in the room with the big pharma companies and talk to them directly. So I guess if anyone on this call has good C-suite contacts with, you know, AstraZeneca and Eli Lilly and a few others, please let me know because I know they think they're getting value for money, and Icon or the other CROs are telling them they are, but they're slowing down trials and we're missing opportunities. We're missing opportunities for our patient population, And there's no good coming out of this wasted negotiation with people who have no training, no authority, and and they don't know what they're doing, quite frankly. So um, we're also looking at, you know, we're in the process of trying to get a new tool in place. Every campus has this tool right now. It's called Trinetics. It's a pharmacy funded platform that allows, I should say every medical campus, that allows you to, it kind of peers into your EMS or EMR, and you plug in your inclusion and exclusion criteria, and it pulls out participant numbers. So they're a bit more solid than the um, way of doing it prior to that. The goal is to be able to create an internal SUNY network with Buffalo, Upstate, Downstate, and Stony Brook, so that when we're doing feasibility numbers, we're pulling from the patient records across the whole system. Currently, two of the campuses are signed. Upstate and Downstate initially signed on the Research Foundation side because it was quicker and easier because some of the terms and conditions that Trinetics wanted to do. Stony Brook is now signed on the SUNY side, and I'm in the process of working with Trinetics and SUNY Council to get Upstate and Downstate re-signed on the SUNY side, because then we can put a DUA in place, and then we're going to be pooling those patient records for the purposes of both internal research for SUNY faculty and for feasibility numbers. Because then now, let's say that's now a pool of, say, 3 or 4 million. I know at Buffalo, you've had a big project going on moving the data from Kaleida Health into IHI. And so I need to reach back out to one of your faculty, Peter, who's been heading that for a couple of years, because ultimately we would want to have the Buffalo data in the same internal SUNY uh, research network, so that when pharma's looking in, they can see how many people fits the trial. And again, we could fill any trial with the patient populations across the state. And then if we can get around this intervening CRO issue where we already have clinical trials in place, clinical trial agreements, then it's again budgets and IRB. And also, well, obviously you still got to recruit, right? I'm not taking away from all the good work you all do once we've signed the contract. But we're just trying to figure out how to reduce barriers, and some of the efforts that Jill and I are alluding to, we're looking for money from New York State. If we can do this well, we not only increase our clinical research and our clinical trials, but we bring new potential health therapeutics to New York State public. And whether it's, upstate or downstate, there are places where people are not getting access to clinical trials and new therapies, like you do if you live in Boston or Philadelphia or Cleveland or Memphis, where, the whole physician network in the region is tuned into and thinking about clinical trial opportunities. So the goal is to really over the next couple of years, leverage up and become a powerhouse for the sake of research, for the sake of improving human life, but also for the sake of benefiting folks here.
One thing I will say with regard to the Trinetics IHI, just especially if you're talking to Peter, is to how it impacts with the new Epic project that we have, because that is going to vastly expand, that right now IHI gets, data from BGH and, Millard and that, but the Epic project is going to go out to all of their, down into the south,
it's exciting. It's exciting, right? Because, but Western New York, you guys are creating a region-wide, essentially, I wouldn't say unitary, but all connected, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's powerful.
Yeah, there's a lot going into it, and there's going to be a lot of data in there. And I just wasn't sure how much of that is going into the IHI system for that Trinetics, because there's elements within Epic as well that can do a lot of that feasibility question,
Yeah. I mean, we don't want to duplicate efforts, but the neat thing about Trinetics is it allows external pharma to, you know, to run feasibility numbers. I mean, we still have gatekeepers at all the medical universities who are the Trinetics key admins, so people don't need to worry about stuff going further than it should. But the good work we've done on harmonizing budgets and these master agreements, and then if we can get Trinetics in place and we're at a point now, 15 years ago, not every, some campuses didn't even have, Epic or anything, right? And single IRB was a pie in the sky. And so we're really at, I think, a fantastic inflection point where the state's interested in stepping in and, and we have brilliant faculty who do amazing work. Your campus, I can think of alone, right? The pacemaker and
Mhm.
the drug that you give preemie babies to help their lungs develop, those,
Surfactant.
those are Buffalo inventions, and
Mhm.
that's only the start of a long list.
Yeah. Yeah. The other, especially for those on the call, like there's there's the reference to the SUNY masters that are there, but Buffalo also has a number of master agreements that have also been negotiated that
Mhm.
I think if it would be helpful if we could get a list together of those that are on the SUNY level and those that are on the UB level for the investigators that are out there that so that they're
Yeah.
aware of, just what masters are available at what level.
Okay. Yeah, I can coordinate with the four sites. And for folks on the call, sometimes we have either medical device companies or pharmaceuticals that are very busy at one campus alone. So we have local masters, as Kim rightly pointed out. So we don't expand them to other campuses if there's just simply no activity there. The other thing I would say is if you're aware of a startup or some company that is going to be doing a lot of trials and you're interested in getting a master put in place, and it seems likely that there's going to be the kind of activity that would justify it, we're happy to get one set up in advance of any trials so that when the protocol comes out, when things are ready to rock and roll, we're not wasting time on the contracts.
Can I jump in with a question or two?
Absolutely.
So I appreciated, I saw an email that came across that you were mentioning the fact that you have great attention to operational aspects of an organization, and it's evident in what you've been able to accomplish. I'm curious just to know the history, like
Mm.
how did you identify the organizations that you wanted to pursue CTAs and NDAs with first? Was it just because you saw the big picture across SUNY, or like how did you go about doing that?
Yeah, we have a report that we run quarterly, and Jill, I should probably get you on the distribution list for that. And let me know who else. And it's just a report of active clinical trial agreements across SUNY. So obviously, almost all of them are at the four medical universities. The report includes optometry. And then, there's some non-invasive clinical trials at other campuses, but the bulk is at the four medical universities. So we look at the number of trials and the dollar value of the trials, and those are the people we want to go after and get a master in place. So we're not wasting time.
That's smart.
And as part of your campus strategy, again, if there's a company that isn't on the list or isn't on the local master list, let's get cracking. Let me know, get me contact. We'll get going because it, it shouldn't be held up because of a contract. That's the last thing we want to have happen. And one thing I will say about master contracts versus one-offs. So, you know, master contracts can take time to put in place because again, they're going to be the same terms and conditions for every trial for that pharmaceutical sponsor across all of SUNY, no matter what the trial is. Now, if you've got a trial where, let's say it's a cancer trial and it's really a Hail Mary, this isn't really about clinical research. It's about getting a drug that's proving efficacious in similar situated patients and getting this patient into that trial so they have a hope. If we're negotiating those one-offs, we don't fight over subject injury and this and that. Because we just need to get them into the trial and get them to that drug. Um, so we do sometimes for those situations accept terms and conditions that we couldn't accept in a master, where the next time it might not be a one-off cancer drug for a Hail Mary. It might be, 80 participants with a highly risky, trial where we want to make sure they are covering reasonably any subject injury that arises. So, this is why we like to get the masters negotiated in advance because they've got to cover every possible trial that could come out of that pipeline from that pharmaceutical company. Because again, we're trying to protect, the patients, the doctors, and the institutions.
What sort of lift is it for you and your team? Like once you identify somebody, we would bring somebody to you and, offer some sort of rationale as to how they were identified. Is it 6 months? Is it a 12-month period?
Oh, no, no.
A wizard?
That depends on the company. I mean, we've done them in 2 or 3 months for the average master, I would say. The,
Wow.
the, tou- the toughest ones are medical device companies. They're really, they're really kind of tricksy is, I guess, the kindest professional way I could say it. They'll say, okay, we'll cover subject injury, but then they'll define subject injury as anything you could reasonably anticipate happening in the universe, possibly in the future. And and my feeling is, yeah, we're in a risky business, and this person is in a situation where they need this, say, experimental medical device. But at the end of the day, um, the upside, if the device is successful and licensed and authorized, the upside goes to the company, not to the patients who've been participating all along. So we just think it's, reasonable that they cover the natural and obvious consequences of a defect in the device itself or in the installation of the device. So those, and you can look on this list and, Edwards Life Sciences, Boston Scientific, Boehringer Ingelheim. There's a couple that they take a lot longer because we go back and forth for a very long time. Sometimes we don't reach agreement because they really don't want to have any liability whatsoever, and um, we don't think that's appropriate. But for the bulk of them, and you can tell when you get in, say, we always start with that ACTA Master Clinical Trial Agreement as a start because that's the one that was kind of negotiated between industry and universities a number of years ago. It's a middle of the road, I think, very fair to everyone, kind of contract starting point. Uh, and if they say no, we'd like to start with our, master, you can look at it. And the good pharmaceutical companies who really do a lot of work with medical universities, it's all very reasonable and it goes very quickly, because they work with all the major university medical systems, say all the ones around Boston and Philadelphia, and they know, and why waste time? And they know the limitations we have as universities, and the savvier ones also know there's some limitations we have being in New York State. So I would say the good corporate citizens, they move very quickly.
Thank you. I do have another question, but I want to see if anybody else on the session would like to pose something. I don't want to hog time. Okay, I'll follow up then.
Mhm.
We are always trying to find ways to support investigators, both in just the traditional research space and
Mhm.
somebody who's at the bench, and especially in the clinical trial space. So from my vantage, I look at what you have done, and what you've been able to implement for all of SUNY institutions to take advantage of. And I see the list and I say, are these the organizations that we should be looking at to be putting opportunities from them in front of our investigators more frequently? Because this is already done.
Mhm.
And it's actually, I think it's more efficient from an organizational
Mhm.
perspective where we're not just bogging down our colleagues and
Right.
sponsor projects where you were situated at one point. So, are you in agreement with that? Or, I mean, what are your thoughts on how we can best leverage this to help the community and help the PIs that we're working with?
Yeah. Well, what I'm hoping is that we get, through one of these state initiatives that you and I are both working on is um, funding for, it's not really a business development person, but someone along those lines, right? Because with all the pharmaceuticals, We'll cut this into two categories, major pharma and startups. For major pharma, we know their drug pipelines. You go to their websites. We know what's in development. We know what's in trials now. We know what's coming down the line. You know, I think it'd be great. You know, let's say we take the list of current master and CTAs in place. We look at those product pipelines, and then we go to SUNY System has been working on a tool that kind of pulls together all of the scientific expertise across SUNY. You know, through grants, contracts, publications, patents, and you know, I would like to start connecting people we have with things that are coming down the pipeline and seeing if they're interested in those upcoming protocols. Because then internally we could actually run feasibility numbers based on that and, you know, reach out to, you know, Biogen and say, hey, you know, we see that in first quarter, whatever, you're going to be looking for, you know, sites for the following. You know, we've done the following homework. This is what we can provide. We've got a master in place. You know, we can be, you know, setting up and recruiting right away. I mean, that just takes someone who can investigate that on the SUNY side in terms of who might be interested, and then doing some work on the feasibility side. Um, but I think that would more quickly, you know, bring opportunities to fruition. I think on the startup or, you know, startup pharma side, that's going to be another kind of, you know, person to find out who's operating in which spaces. You know, some of our campuses are starting to get into phase one, phase two clinical trials, you know, where there's probably more opportunity with startup. Um, but I think Jill, it's going to take some money and a few FTEs and some, you know, data gathering to start making connection. You know, it's the old-fashioned matchmaking, right? And if there's a health need, what would be really cool, right? If there's an overwhelming health need in your region, is start to see if we can align those with either, you know, with the pipelines that some of the major pharmaceuticals are already working on.
Thank you for that. Does anybody have any other questions? Scott, do you have any closing thoughts? Because I just,
No, I'd say reach out if any questions or anything that you have questions about. I mean, it's we're really we're there is a couple concurrent system-wide efforts going on. I think Marian
a couple of
Hassan.
hands going up,
Yeah,
actually. Oh, hang
okay.
on. Yeah, okay. Mary Ann, do you want to go first?
Yeah,
I
I was
see.
going to ask Scott if you could give the group a little uh appetite of appetite of Peaser for the two system level or two central level initiatives. That would maybe be helpful.
Okay. So quickly, there is we're looking at the possibility, and this is an idea that came, Marianne, from I think the governor's office, right? The statewide CRO.
I think there was an initiative, it was parallel tracking, and I think both groups came up with
Yeah,
this at the same time. It's
and then there
parallel
was a
tracking, and
SUNY.
now
Yep.
it's kind of converging, but we have very definite parallel tracks.
Yeah. So the chancellor initiated working groups among, you know, clinical faculty and what would they need to grow it, and they came up with instead of reinventing the wheel at every campus, can we have a system-wide kind of clinical research office that, you know, helps to, you know, manage multi-site trials across the system. At the same time, there was a request from the governor's office, how do we grow this, you know? And so those right now, there's a number of kind of proposals being looked at, discussed, with the output being ultimately an ask in the next budget cycle from New York State. You know, and and I think the state assembly has figured out that with what's happening in DC and with what's happening with NIH, you know, the states have got to step up and, you know, help with some of the funding so that we can build the infrastructure and do the things we need to do. There's also we're working on how we might do a one-stop shop for industry-sponsored research outside of just clinical trials. Because again, industry, depending on how your campus is structured or, actually, a number of years ago, Jeff Dunbar at UB brought in kind of a one-stop shop where, you know, businesses didn't have to go to 8 different departments to try and get an answer. You worked with one coordinator at your campus, say, Jennifer Mandina Weiss, who would then pull in the budget from sponsored programs and take care of the contract, and they weren't bouncing the company around. They were the interface. Um, but other campuses don't have that structure, and it gets very frustrating, and people walk away because they're working on a 30-day, 45-day turnaround. They have an immediate question that, especially if it's, say, material testing or um, they need it turned around quickly. They don't have time. And to be really fair to our folks in sponsored programs, they are set up and designed for applying for federal grants. That's how the budgets are done. That's how all the software is aligned. That's how they're trained. All the compliance is geared around federal grants. Um, Negotiating with an industry partner for a sponsored program is a different deal. You're not doing a line item budget where it's cost reimbursable, it's fixed price. Like when you go to the hardware store and you buy a hammer, you don't get a breakdown of how much was metal and how much was the handle and how much was the manufacturing and how much was the electrical and what the 100% F&A that the company put on, because that's how they can cover their insurance and everything else. You decide whether or not you want to pay $24 for this hammer. And that's the approach we need to take with industry contracts. Um, in the past, I would say that industry has taken advantage of universities because, we're geared up for these federal grants. We tend to say, okay, well, if it's 2 grad students, 5% of my time, and I'll try not to drink any water or go to the bathroom, then we can do it this cheaply. And then we're never really recovering enough funds to cover the full cost of undertaking the research, which means that some other part of your campus budget is making up for that lack of recovery of cost. And I would argue probably it's student tuition, but that's probably a political thing that we'll delete out of this recording.
Sure we will. Marianne, you had your hand up again and your mic is
Oh,
on.
yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's not just that the federal government and, we're seeing changes in this funding landscape. I do believe that there's been enough uh, profile raising on this for people to understand that clinical research, translational research is an economic driver.
Yeah.
And if you look at what's happened in different parts of the country, right, it is very definitely part of the DNA of the economy of RTP in North Carolina, full stop, right?
Greater Boston.
So, yep, Boston, Seattle, blah, blah, Cleveland, yada, yada. I mean, how many people go to Cleveland just because of Cleveland Clinic and all the associated trials, cases there, blah, blah, blah. So I think they're finally understanding that some of the real value, the public good value that can come out of our public academic medical centers, and we're trying to push that along. So I think we have friends at Empire State Development, and so it's more than just the what's going on in Washington. I think that certainly helps push, but it's not the whole story.
It's good.
Marianne, did you want to just quickly introduce yourself? I can't.
Oh,
but
yeah.
I think it would
Okay,
be nice
sorry.
for people
Hey,
to know who you
everybody.
are. It's okay.
Thanks. I'm crashing your party. Uh, I'm Marianne Hassan, and I'm in the System Administration Office in the Office of the Provost, and I work very closely with Ram, who is, of course, the RF president, but he's also the Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost on the SUNY side. And so my research admin experience is on campus side, I have a little bit of the medical side, more in devices than the clinical stuff. So I can speak both sides of the fence in terms of, talking with faculty, understanding sponsor stuff, and I talk with Scott and team all the time. I have been very involved in this initiative and I see Brian's hand up, and Brian's been involved in, we had 5 working groups going on. Jill's been extremely critical to us in the clinical trials working group. And we're in the final stages in a discussion draft, getting ready to package that up so that the ROM can hand it to the chancellor with recommendations. And then we have to put a budget behind it and put a budget ask and say, what can we do that's low hanging fruit that will help everybody with an industry engagement? And a lot of the things that came out of the clinical trials group came out in the other groups,
Yep.
time to contract, right? But slightly different. It's nuanced for you guys. So infrastructure, training. And how do we capitalize on the expertise across campuses? And I think with clinical trials, there's a lot to exploit there. I mean, we didn't fully discuss it, but even like clinical cores. I mean, we've even seen just some open channels of discussion and being able to share some resources in terms of even human resources when, your one person who handles certain things goes out on maternity leave or on grand jury duty for the next 4 weeks, and you've got stuff you can't, it's got to process through the pipeline. We've got people across the system who could help. How do
Yeah.
we start moving all that stuff forward? So I'll continue to help with all this as it moves forward and see where it goes. I'm excited about the possibilities, and I think everybody is excited about the collaboration opportunities, which could really leverage everybody.
Thank you. And Marianne's being modest. She's the chief of staff in the office of the provost. So she's been a wonderful partner to the campus. So Dr. Clemency is one of our rock stars in emergency medicine. He had his hand up.
I was so focused on Marianne's great comments, I almost forgot what I was going to say. So that was great. Jill and Scott, thank you so much. I think this is great because we're focusing on like systems rather than just hoping the thing will go faster for no good reason. So that's great. One of the questions we get a lot from sponsors is how long does it take? And do we have any general benchmarks around NDAs, non-master agreements and master agreements that we could share, understanding there's tremendous variability and really wide confidence intervals around those numbers. But I feel like I'm constantly avoiding or making up answers to those questions. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of my colleagues are too.
I don't know if we have hard metrics, Dr. Clemency, because it's not something we've tracked. But I can tell you if the terms and conditions are similar to the ACTA, we could have it signed in a matter of weeks. If they're going to push GDPR obligations and want to refuse to accept any subject injury coverage, I mean those are the ones that slow things down, and we go back and forth. We've made, I think, good progress on the IP stuff because as someone who negotiates contracts, right? I mean, everyone for the past 30 years has been afraid of being the next campus that had the Rogaine or the Gatorade, right? Like what happens if we miss the accidental discovery while we're undertaking the protocol? And that's because that was hammered into all of, the contract negotiators over the years. But, if you're following the protocol, there isn't going to be any invention, right? And what are you going to do with your accidental invention? Even if you can negotiate language where you capture for the university that you have this little sliver of accidental invention off to the side, you can't practice it without the background and IP of the pharma. So we've gotten people to relax on that a lot. And even on subject injury, outside of negotiating with medical device companies, it's like subject injury is rare. It's very rare. Like system wide, I think I know of like one subject injury case across the four medical universities that was definitely subject injury due to a defect in manufacturing or in design. But in a lot of cases, right? If depending on where the stage, if it's a stage 4 cancer trial, so that's where we can also speed up because if just cover the subject injury. It's going to be rare. It's probably never going to happen. The invention's probably never going to happen. So let's not waste time on that. Let's So it's bringing some sophistication, Dr. Clemency, to the contract, and that's where maybe, and it's hard too if you're at a campus where there's been a lot of turnover in your contracting staff. It takes time and experience to know when to let go on something and when it's okay outside of a master. So I don't have a set answer, but if they're closer to the ACTA, if they can work with that, we could be inking it in like no time. But if they're going to be holding us to data standards we can't meet or to subject injury that's inequitable, we probably will never reach a happy point.
No, I appreciate that. And I appreciate how complex the question is without a clear answer. I think one of the things that might be helpful, not for this call, but in the future, would just be to have a standardized, although imperfect answer to that question,
Hmm.
just so that we're all kind of giving the same party
Sure.
line, understanding that it is an imperfect
Well,
answer.
well, no, but we are going to be moving towards that in our industry contract approach. Is if you can accept our standard template, we'll sign it tomorrow. And if you want to negotiate each and every one, it's going to take longer. And then that puts the ball in the court of the industry sponsor. And so and especially if it's a contract under 75,000, just sign the damn template. I mean, honestly, I'm sorry, but this isn't a Supreme Court case. Why are we spending all this time? Um, so that's going to be our approach. Please use, if you can use our template, we can sign it tomorrow. Then we just have budgets and IRB, external IRB. That's, think about the time now versus 15 years ago.
So that standard, Scott, when you said the 75K or less, so that was something that came up in three of the working
Yeah.
groups. So very definitely, I think that is a recommendation going forward. And so
Hmm.
it's not just about clinical.
Oh, yeah.
So it's going to be across the board and it will make a huge difference. Stony Brook's already been, I don't want to even say piloting, they've rolled this out.
Yeah.
And it has at least with the participating, we had all the doctorals participate and everybody who's heard it and understands it. And especially when Scott brings up the Hail Mary example, right? But um, everyone's been very supportive and we feel like that one's going to be a no-brainer for moving
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah. The challenge, Marianne, is, for sometimes if faculty undervalue or underprice,
Uh,
um,
Understood. Understood.
because we have a couple folks in the UAV lithography field who are the godfathers of everything that's in our phones. And they're very humble and they're like, oh, I'm fine. I'll just have a glass of water and a side of fries. And, and, so that's something we have to realistically tackle because like Dr. Tal, you're on the call, you're doing groundbreaking work, telemed, and you just want to bring new therapies to people who aren't getting them, right? That's your goal, right? Improving
Exactly. Yeah.
improving the life of people, right?
No, but
Yeah.
totally agree. And what usually happens is a faculty member would come to me and say, "Oh, I want to do this," and I said, "Tell me what you want to do, and I'll price it out and like the elasticity of the money." And for 70, oh yeah, this will be 75,000. Well, yeah, they sketched out a $265,000 budget, right? So I get it, but I don't know, Dr. Talal, would this something like this be helpful for your group?
Yeah, no, comparative pricing. And the thing that I wanted to just say, comment on is one, don't think about as you're developing all of this infrastructure, which is really great for all of the expected and usual, think about other places. If we really want to move healthcare, we need to go to places like methadone programs
Hmm.
where research has not been conventionally done. Those of you, many of you know that I ran a trial for Picori for
Hmm.
12 methadone programs. And Scott, thanks, Scott. I'm happy to report. I don't know whether I ever closed the loop, but it was one of the top three clinical trials for 2025.
Oh, that's awesome.
Tim
Yep.
Murphy nominated, and the dean and Dr. Bashir nominated it, and they never got into the top 10 before, but let alone top three. But I also wanted to give you feedback on focus because
Hmm.
we had so Scott knows very well and visited here in 2023. when we did at UB when we did a site visit of the Focus program, which is a Gilead-sponsored program that promotes screening for hepatitis B, HIV, and hepatitis C in the emergency rooms. It's a unique, I would imagine, funding because it has to go to the health center. And we ran it here at Kaleida for from 2019 through 2025. Kaleida decided that in the Epic conversion that they couldn't support it right now, and so it's now being housed, hopefully temporarily, at one of our other health systems here. But I think, Kim was helpful, tried to be helpful in terms of negotiating it, but it's those unique, it has to be a health system. So I don't know how you tackle that where we don't own the hospital, but in your overall scheme, if you could keep those kinds of things on the agenda, it would be really helpful as you renegotiate the affiliate, UB, affiliation agreements and such.
No, thank you. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Thank you, Dr. Talal.
sure.
Anyone else? I just want to say, I've been fortunate to be in some working groups with Scott and Marianne. You can recognize why we are in such a great position with their leadership in this space. Not only do they understand what it takes to actually make things function, but they actually see the big picture and can speak to that as well. And just hearing you talk about trying to just be efficient when it brings another option to a patient or a family or somebody that we care about is part of your remarks, when a lot of times we talk so much about how do we get things done. It's very inspiring. I've been so impressed over the last number of months in the time that I've spent with both Pam and Kim and their team and the CRO here at UB, because they think about it the same way. They're always commenting in a meeting about not just, okay, what can we do to help campus and investigators move forward, but really what the big picture is and bringing some great solutions. So I thank both of you for taking the time. I think the CRO team, we've got some CTSI folk on as well.
Yep.
And I'm super excited because of the vision that you have. And I'm a paper pusher. I get to sit in these meetings and help move some paragraphs around and listen and learn. But we need people like me too in the background, I think. So just want to say thank you to both of you for your leadership, taking the time to do this. Scott, I know you're wildly busy.